Okay. Hi, this is Sepha. Sorry, this is Sepha Kirshblum, who was Scheinbein and just got messed up. And I'm presenting about Marror of the Seder. Tonight is Sunday night, March 30th at 8 o'clock. Definitely had to look at my phone to make sure I don't mess up again. Um, okay, so hold on. Let's make this larger. Okay, so I wanted to talk about when we say maror, right? If we're going to acknowledge maror at the Seder, then obviously, we can have our discussion. Is the maror the lettuce? Is the maror the white horseradish that, opens your sinuses? All of those things are important, and I'm not taking away from that. But I think everyone has their family minhag for that and has their interesting emotional attachment to it in whatever way they do. So therefore, tonight I wanted to present the concept of Maror for the people in Mitzrayim and a few other oddities that took place in what we refer to as Pesach Mitzrayim. Now, I know some of those things won't necessarily have to do with Maror. I will address Maror, but I think there are so many incredible elements to unpack from Perek Yud Bet in Sefer Shemot that I just wanted to devote some time to it tonight. So hopefully you will enjoy the ride, even if it's not solely about Maror. Okay, so we're going to dive right into Shmot Perek Yud Bet. And just to give context of where we are, right, I can't say often enough, right? If ever you're going to learn any part of Tanakh, you can't take anything out of context. You have to understand and appreciate the context that we're delving into, to appreciate the character's mindset, to appreciate what they're going through, and where God is coming from in that regard. Right, so before we enter Perek Yud Bet, I want to give a quick backstory. I think, thank God, we're somewhat familiar with the story, but just to give us context, we have just finished Makkah number 9, right? So really, even to zoom back even further, right, we're talking about a nation who has been enslaved by the Mitzrayim for over 200 years. And when we say enslaved, we mean they were treated as subhuman, right? And this is definitely a piece of Maror, right? They embittered our lives. They embittered our lives. They did not treat us like even humans, forget equals. They did not treat us like humans. They treated us as some other thing that existed, and they wanted to demean us to such an extent that we would never be able to create an uprising and we would never be able to leave. Right? That was their ultimate goal. And once they enslave us, then they torture us. Then they kill our children. Then they beat us constantly. Right? We're not going to go through those first, psukim of Perek Aleph, because I think we are all familiar with the torture that we lived through in that time. And now we've gone through 9 Makot, and the Jewish people are just, I would say, waiting on bated breath, or at least that's how I would assume they are feeling and thinking, which brings us right into Perek Yud Bet. But that mindset is going to help us with a lot of the issues that we're going to be dealing with in Perek Yud Bet. Right, so we open with Pasuk Aleph, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim le'mor. Right, and Hashem comes to Moshe and Aaron while they're still in Mitzrayim, right? Because it's this understanding, we feel like we're almost out, right? Like we're coming to the climax, right? So while we're still in Mitzrayim, Hashem comes to us with the very famous pasuk, right? And how apropos, I know at least I'm in Israel, so we finished about an hour ago, but for those of you outside of Israel, you have more hours of this, right? HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim. This month is going to be the first of all months, right? Designating Nisan as the first. Rishon hu lachem l'chodshei hashana, right? Nisan is going to be not just the first month, but it's how your year begins. Pasuk Gimel, Dabru al kol adat b'nei Yisrael lemor, be'asor lachodesh hazeh, v'yichu lahem ish seh lebeit avot seh lebeit. Right? And now tell the Jewish people that on the 10th of this month, everyone needs to go get a sheep per household. So now we're going to take a step back, right? We're not going to delve into Rosh Chodesh in depth, right? That to me, that's a separate shir having nothing to do with Marror, right? But if I want to just get a brief understanding, Hashem is giving us a structured plan on our exit plan, right? And step one of the exit plan is the concept of owning your own time, right? As a slave, you have no ability to control your time. Your time's not yours, right? Whatever your master says needs to be done by X time or Y time, that's what needs to be done. Even if that wasn't the instructions yesterday. If those are the instructions today, then that's what you need to do, right? So Hashem is saying, first and foremost, own your own time. Realize you're now in charge. No one can tell you what to do, right? No Mitzri is going to tell you where you have to be at 6 a.m. tomorrow or in the middle of the night tonight. Now, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, right? This is now for you and giving us the opportunity to create Kedushat Hazman, right? The idea of Kedushat Hazman is huge, right? The only time that's designated as Kadosh that's not in human hands is Shabbos, right? He's his own element of Kedusha, right? But all other Kedushat Hazman, all Chagim are based on us, right? Because the whole idea of Rosh Chodesh is that you need two edim, right? Two witnesses to say, I see the moon, right? Or rather I don't, right? There's none left. And it's the smallest it can be. And therefore it's Rosh Chodesh. And even if they're wrong, right? Even if they're off by a day, God says, no, it's yours, which means every Chag could be off by a day. But God says, no, it's yours. Kedushat Hazman is made by humans because you need to feel in control of your time again, right? So we open with that element of structure, but then Pasuk Gimel gives us this second insight to the significance of Rosh Chodesh, right? Because Hashem says, now that you know today's Aleph, right? It's Aleph Nisan. Now that you know today's Aleph, now I want you to count 10 days. Right? Count 10 days, wait those 10 days, and in 10 days, I want you to go choose a sheep. Right? Let's continue on in this sheep. Pasuk Dalid. Ve'im yim'at habayit mihiyot miseh v'lakahu ushcheno hakarov el beito b'mechsat nefashot ish lefiach lo tachosu al haseh. Right? So here's what I want you to do. I told you to take a sheep for your family, but let's say your family isn't big enough to eat a whole sheep, right? Which is most families, right? So here's what I need you to do. I want you to decide to do a potluck communal meal, right? But not with your friends, not with your best friends, right? You need to eat with Hashchino Hakarov El Beito. You need to eat with your neighbor that lives closest to your house, right? You may not even be friends with them, but whichever Jewish neighbor is closest to you, that's who you combine with to make sure this set is going to be eaten. Pasuk Hey, set tamim zachar ben shana, yelachem min hakvasim umin hayizim tikachu. Right? It has to be a year old. It can be from the sheep, a goat. Pasuk Vav, v'haya lachem lemishmeret. And then, what do you need to do with this animal? You need to watch it. Ad arba asar yom lachodesh hazeh. Until the 14th day, right? For 4 days, you need to watch this sheep, which we'll talk about in a minute, and only then, v'shachatu oto, then you can kill it, kol kahalata Yisrael bin arbaim, and the entire nation, right? The entire Jewish people. We're talking, as we see later in the count, right? 2 million people are part of this nation, right? 600,000 men between 20 and 60, right? So even if only the men do the shafting and not every man, so you're telling me 100,000 men, right? I'm even being generous, 1/6, right? Every 6 families combined, I'm guessing, right? So 100,000 Jews at the exact same time on the eve of Yodalid are going to be shafting these sheep, right? So 100,000 sheep have been being watched for 4 days. And it's so interesting. I think there's some universal picture that has been given out by every kindergarten teacher out there, right? That your kids come home with in kindergarten of the sheep being tied to the bedpost, right? But Lefia Mefarshim, it was not on the bedpost it was tied to your front door, okay? You had this animal like Kilu in your mini barn out front for everyone to see. And as we know with sheep, or if you don't know, if you haven't been around sheep, they're quite loud, right? So this baaing is going on the entire time of these 4 days. And then everyone shechs it at the exact same time. Pasuk Zayin, v'lakchu min hadam, v'natnu al shtei hamezuzot, v'al hamashkof. Right? You're going after you shech the animal, then you're going to take the blood, you're going to put it on the 2 doorposts and the mashkof, right, the lintel, al habatim asher yochlu oto bahem, but only on the houses that you're eating inside of. Okay, super strange, right? I hope everyone's picking up on how weird this night is, but it's going to get weirder. Pasuk chet, v'achlu et habasar balayla hazeh, and you will eat the meat on that night. Tzli esh, it needs to be roasted. And here's our kicker line, al matzot v'al morim yochluhu. The people of Mitzrayim, the people who have suffered and lived through the hell of Mitzrayim, now on Leil Yitziat Mitzrayim, have to eat this roasted seh with matzah and with marror. Now, hopefully, this is really confusing to you, right? This is so strange. I don't get it, right? In today's times, right, in 2 weeks from now, we are going to have to eat matzah, right? We eat matzah because they left before their dough could rise. Okay, we'll go back to that. And number 2, we have marror because we are trying to connect to these people. Right? We are trying to be able to, in some way, emotionally connect to something that happened thousands of years ago, right? So, acharei ha'peulot nimshachim halevavot, right? Says the Sefer HaChinuch, we do things, actions affect our heart, so let's have maror that tastes terrible so that we remember the terrible that they suffered through. But they don't need maror to remember the terrible that they are living through. Right? They don't need any edible reminder. They're living through it. They haven't even fully left yet. So they need a helping reminder, right? That's so odd, right? If anything, I think it's probably one of the biggest questions we're going to ask tonight, hence Marror, right? But it's so strange. But the strange continues. Pasuk Tet. Al toflumi menuna uvasham mevushal b'mayim. You can't eat that animal, right? That sack cannot be boiled in some way. Only ki en tzli esh rosho al kra'av ve'al kirbo. And it can't just be roasted. He needs to be roasted whole, right? I don't know about anybody else, but this totally brings me to my big fat Greek wedding, where they roasted this pig out front and the entire neighborhood, number one, saw it and smelled it. And it was just the scene, right? So imagine 100,000 scenes, 100,000 people roasting a whole animal in their front or backyard. The whole Mitzrayim must have reeked from the cooking of these animals, right? So there was no hiding this, which is going to be a major piece here. Pasuk Yud. Velo sosiru mimenu ad boker, and you could have nothing left over until morning. Hanotar mimenu ad boker, va'ish tisrofu. If there was any food left over, if there any part that was not consumed, it had to be burnt. Pasuk Yud Aleph. And here's how you eat it, right? Even instructions on how you eat it. Matnechem chagurim, right? Your belts are buckled. Na'alechem biraglechem, shoes on your feet. Umakelchem biyadchem, and your walking sticks in hand. Va'achaltem oto b'chipazon, you need to eat in a rush. Pesach hu Lashem, because this night is Pesach, right? And I always think about the shoes on your feet, I guess, because maybe times have changed. I don't wear a belt, so it doesn't really speak to me. And thank God I'm not at a point that I need a walking stick. But, to me, it brings me, I would say all jokes aside, but it really, there is humor in this ridiculousness, right? My kids get dressed in the morning, but at 7:29, since we leave at 7:30 in the morning, at 7:29, everyone has to put on their shoes. And there are some days that I look at myself and I say, why don't we just put our shoes on to start so that I don't have to deal with the 7:29, right? But that's pretty much what Hashem is saying, right? I want you shoes on feet. No calling you at 7:29 because the bus is at 7:30. I want the shoes on your feet. It's like those people who are so excited for a flight, right? Or even parents who are excited for their kids for the flight and they put their kids to bed in the clothes, right? Because I want you just ready, right? That is the vibe of this pasuk. Hashem is saying, I want you just ready that night, like all hands on deck, all excited, waiting for the moment. Don't forget, I just want to re-highlight that when are they being told this? Rosh Chodesh Nisan. They have 2-week warning, 2-week heads up for this Eat B'chipazon. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Pasuk Bet. And God continues and says, "Va'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'layl hazeh," and I will pass through Mitzrayim on that night. V'hiketi kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, and I am going to kill out every firstborn in Mitzrayim, me'adam ad behima, right, from animal to man. Bechol Elohei Mitzrayim eseh shvatim, right, of all the gods of Mitzrayim, I will judge because Ani Hashem, I am the God, right? Pasuk Yud Gimel, v'haya hadam lachem leot, and the blood will be for you a sign. Al habatim asher atem sham, in the houses that you were eating in. But then, here's our oxymoron, our next oddity, V'ra'iti et hadam, and I, God, will see this blood, ufasachti aleichem, and I will pass over you, v'lo yeh b'chem negef l'mashlit, right? And I'll pass over you, no one will die in your house, v'hakoti be'Mitzrayim, when I bring this makah onto Egypt. Okay. Pasuk Yud Daled, v'haya hayom hazeh lachem lezikaron. But it's not just a one-night thing, right? This night is so significant. I need a zikaron. I need us to create a remembrance of this day. V'chagotem oto chag l'Hashem. It's going to become a chag. L'dorotechem chukat olam tachaguhu. Right? For all future generations, this will be the chag you celebrate. Now, we have mentioned many, many strange questions, but sadly, I'm not done. We have more questions. We're going to keep going before we go back to answering them. Okay, hold on. Next page. Great. I skip a few psukim of the details of Pesach L'Dorot, right? All the psukim we just read before is referred to as Pesach Mitzrayim, right? And it's the idea of the Pesach that they celebrated while still in Mitzrayim, and the Pesach that we're going to be celebrating in a week and a half or 2 weeks is referred to as Pesach L'Dorot, Pesach for all future generations. So I skipped many psukim that give all the rules for Pesach L'Dorot. And then Pasuk Chaf Aleph, Vayikra Moshe the whole Ziknei Yisrael, Vayomer Alehem. So Moshe calls the Zikanim and he says to them, Mishchu ukhu lachem tzon lemishpachotechem v'shachatu haPesach. Right? Go gather and take for yourselves these sheep that we are going to make a Karban Pesach. We'll go back to Rashi after. I'm not done with all my questions. Pasuk Chaf Tet. And bum bum bum, vayehi bechatzi halayla, right? Yud Dalid, Leil Yud Dalid comes, right? We are now in the eve, the nighttime of Tedvav of Pesach, and it was in the middle of the night. V'Hashem hika kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, and God comes and kills out every bechor within Egypt. Mi bechor paro hayoshev al kiso. Ad bechor hashvi asher bebeit tabor, bechol bechor behema. Right? There's no discrimination. The bechor of Paro, the highest of the high, in terms of significance, and the guy in jail in the pit, so to speak, his son, his oldest son. Right? There is no one left unscathed. Kol bechor behema, even the animals. Pasuk Lamed, vayakam Paro laila. Paro gets up that night. Hu v'chol avadav, v'chol Mitzrayim. Right, this isn't just Paro on this page. It's all of his servants, all of Mitzrayim. V'tehi tzaka gedola b'Mitzrayim. Their screams are so intense that night in Mitzrayim. Ki ein bayit asher ein sham met, because there is no house that doesn't have death in it. Pasuk Lamed Aleph, Vayikra Moshe Aaron Laila, and Paro calls to Moshe and Aaron that night, and he says, finally, Kumu Tze'umi Tochami, get up and get out. Right? We've been begging to leave. We've been asking for any loophole to leave. And finally, he says to us, Kumu Tze'umi Tochami, right? Get up and get out. Gam atem, gam b'nei Yisrael, right? You too, the whole nation, uluchuv duat Hashem kidaberchem. Go serve your God like you kept asking me. And all the caveats that we kept negotiating, right? Gam tzonchen, gam bekarchen, k'chosher tipartem, right? I don't want to hear about it anymore, right? Take your sheep, take your cattle, take whatever you want. Just valechu, just get out of here, right? Uberachtem gamoti. But before you leave, I just bless me, right? Because I don't want to die, right? And here's what's so strange, right? We've been waiting for this moment. We've been waiting for this moment for over 200 years. And even if we weren't focused in those 200 years, we've been waiting for this moment the entire string of the Makot, right? We have asked over and over with the Makot, and over we were told no, right? Yes, you, but not your animals. Yes, you, not your children. Yes, you, not your wives, right? Finally, it's take everyone and get out. And then comes two really, really strange psukim. Pasuk Lamed Gimel, Vatechazak Mitzrayim al ha'am lemaher l'shalcha min haaretz. Mitzrayim has to strengthen and use their strength to push the nation out. Lemaher l'shalcha, right? Because clearly the Jews aren't fast enough. They're not moving quickly enough. They're not motivated enough. That the Mitzrayim have to use their chizuk, their strength, to push the Jewish people out. And here, in case that was on any level ambiguous, right? What happens? Pasuk Lamed Daled, Vayisa ha'am et b'tzeko, terem yechnatz. And then the nation goes and gets their dough, carries their dough, before it had time to rise. Misarotam surot misimlotam al shechnam, right? And they take the stuff on their back. And the pasuk, I think, to most of us, if we're quickly reading it, it's like, oh, yay, that's the matzah, right? Like you feel all validated. That like, oh yeah, I've heard that since we were kids. We didn't have time for the dough to rise. So now we have matzah. And then you take a minute and you're like, wait a minute, hold on. A few questions, right? Number one, I'm confused because number one, they had matzah at their Seder. Number two, if I had to focus on anything, right, over the next 2 weeks, yes, I'm going to focus on shopping, and yes, I'm going to focus on cooking. But when I focus on the cooking, right, that means, oh, first I have to clear out my freezers, and I have to clear out my pantries, and I have to wipe everything down, and I have to go through all the toy bins, because God only knows what was eaten by the toy bins, and I have to go through all the bedrooms, if I let my kids eat in the bedrooms. And I definitely need to just, everything in the pantry that's open, do you sell chametz gamor, do you not? Right? What becomes the focus? Chametz. Chametz is such a focus for us. Why? Because we can't have chametz, because they left in a rush and didn't have time for their bread to rise. And you go to this pasuk and you have to ask yourself, are you kidding? You put up dough? You've been waiting for this moment for 200 years. And again, if you want to tell me you didn't believe in those 200 years, you sure as heck better have been waiting for this day for minimum 2 weeks. You've had 2 weeks notice for tonight, right? On Rosh Chodesh, in the beginning of Perek Yud Bet, the first source we opened tonight, we opened with this idea that God gives them 2 weeks notice. And then the last thing we do before we leave is Vayisa ha'am et b'tzeko terem yechmatz. I had to go get my dough because it didn't have time to rise. I say with love, why didn't you put that dough up yesterday or this morning? and it would have had plenty of time to rise. What's this doing here? Right? I think about any exciting moment in my life that I'm waiting for. When that moment comes, I didn't just put up dough and say, oh, shucks, it didn't have time to rise. I guess I should go. All right, fine, I'll go. What? Who puts up dough when they're about to leave? Everything about this is so strange, right? And let's go back, look at the exact same psukim, and hopefully understand them better. But by understanding this generation better, I think we'll also understand where our chametz and dough are coming from. So, sorry, we're going right back to the beginning. At the beginning of Parak Yud, right? So Hashem gives us, again, the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, and then we jump right back in to the mitzvot of Pesach Mitzrayim. What was going on with Pesach Mitzrayim? Now, there are so many ways to understand this generation, and yes, they suffered, and yes, they went through a living hell, right? But when you live through that, right, everybody responds to tragedy and suffering in very different spiritual ways. And not only do we all relate to it in different spiritual ways, right, the length and the extent also pushes us in ways that we would never know how we would respond, right? I think of the interview with Yarden Bibas, where he acknowledges that they told him they would treat him so much better and be so much kinder to him if he would convert and if he would believe in their religion, right? And I mamash cannot be able to relate to Yarden in his response of, I was born a Jew and I will die a Jew. And that is the only religion that I will ever believe in, right? And I mind blown by that commitment, right? But these people, it's been 200 years. And can you imagine all the Egyptians who say, I'll treat you better if you just give up on that Yud-Keh Vav-Keh and you believe in what we believe in, right? And how many hundreds of thousands would do that for survival, right? And there was no end in sight. There was no light at the end of the tunnel for them. We're talking centuries, right? So according to most Mefarshim, what happened to so many of the Jewish people? We believed in what the Egyptians believed in, right? We believed in all the gods that they believed in, including the sheep, right? Sheep were an Egyptian god of the time, right? Which is going to be a huge piece of this, right? So just actually before we go into the Pshat, I do want to do that Rashi from page 2, right? So back to Pasuk Chaf Aleph, where it says, Mishchu kulachem tzon, right? To gather and take. And Rashi here quoting the Midrash, and he says, Lefi shahayu shtufim be'elilim, right? What a shatuf, we were partners. The Jewish people were partners in the gods of the Egyptians, and therefore Hashem has to say, Mishchu kulachem, Mishchu yedechem me'elilim. You need to separate your hands from doing the other avodah zarah, u'kulachem tzon shel mitzvah, right? And then take in these sheep to do a mitzvah, meaning it was a 2-stage process for them to be able to say, I don't believe that sheep is a god, and I believe in Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, right? I believe in Hashem and his koach, right? Which is now going to help give us the beginning of the framing of Pesach Mitzrayim, right? So if we go back in, right, Pasuk Gimel, Dabru el kol adat Yisrael lemor, be'asur lachodesh hazeh, vayichu lachem ish zeh lebeit davot zeh labayit, right? And Hashem says you have 10 days. You have 10 days to get it together, right? To number 1, be so firm in your belief in me, right? And number 2, you're going to have to take the sheep. So this isn't a private affirmation, right? This is not just like, oh yeah, in the privacy of my own home, I will do X, Y, and Z, right? As we highlighted as we were going through the Psukim, and we'll re-highlight it, nothing about this is private, right? You take that sheep, right? And Pasuk Daled, Im Yim'at habayit miyot miseh v'lakachu u'shchino hakarov el beito v'mechsat nefashot ish lefi achlo taposu al haseh. And what does Hashem is going to say is part 2 right? First, you're going to have to, well, really part three, right? You have to abandon the avodah zarah and say you believe in me, right? You're going to have to do this in public, which is going to be a really huge piece, right? And number three, you have to unite amongst one another and not amongst friends. This isn't about a fun friend night, right? This is about bonding with other Jews, whether you're friends with them or not, whether you ever engaged in conversation or just nodded hello when you walked in. It's got to go past that because you're sharing tonight with them, right? Pasuk Vav, v'haya lachem lemishmeret ad arba asar yom lachodesh hazeh. And I imagine this must have been one of the hardest things for this generation to do, right? You had to take that sheep, tie it to your front door for 4 days, right? Who's walking by over those 4 days? Who hears those sheep over the 4 days? All the Egyptians. So for 4 days, you're on pins and needles of anxiety, right? Are they going to kill me for doing this? I know we've already gone through 9 of the Makot, so they're kind of scared of us, but not fully, right? They haven't let us out. They haven't freed us. So maybe I'm going to die just because I tied the sheep to my front door. So that is a massive commitment to do something like that, right? And then in case I got away with just having that sheep as a pet, which it shouldn't be a pet because it's a god, right? Then v'shachatu oto kol kahal ada Yisrael bein harabayim. Right? Don't forget what we said before. 100,000 people are shechting their animal at the exact same time. And you're hearing all the noise of it, all the chaos of it. And then they're going to roast it in public, right? With the full animal. I can't hide and be like, oh no, it's my cow that I'm roasting. No, it's visible. It's a full body, right? It says explicitly, right? Where are those words? So sorry, I'm just gonna jump to get to it. Hold on, where's the Tzli Bum bum bum. No, I missed it already. I have to go back. Oh, Pasuk Tet. Al tochlu mimenu na vashel mevushal b'mayim ki im tzli eish rosho al kra'av. Right? It literally is whole. You can't mistake it for any other animal. It's not a piece of meat from anywhere else. It's clearly that sheep, right? And then you take the blood and you put it on the doorposts, right? It's getting stranger and stranger. But now let's go back into Pasuk Chet and hopefully now appreciate it on a new level. V'achlu et habasar b'layla hazeh tzli eish umatzot al morim yochlu. Right, as we mentioned the first time we saw it, right? Matzah and maror, these are things that are built from their story, right? It shouldn't be something they have to connect to, except what is the significance when we think of them living through their hell, right? Why do they need maror? They lived it, they survived it, they don't need it, right? They don't need anything to help them remember their suffering. But when they think of Marror, they literally think of their suffering as individuals. But Hashem says tonight is not about individuals, right? Which is why you can't eat alone. Yeah, right? What family could eat one whole sheep, right? Nobody's eating alone. Everyone is gathered with their neighbors because tonight is about community. And it's not about personal suffering, and it's not about your personal story. It's about a national tragedy. This is creating a national identity because until this night, we weren't a nation. We were B'nai Yisrael. We were all related. We were all descendants of the same guy, right? We all had the same great-great-grandpa, Yaakov, right? But we weren't a nation. We weren't a people. And Hashem says, tonight is a night to become a people. And therefore, your matzah and maror are to appreciate that, yes, you have your own personal story. But tonight, I want you to only focus on that national story, right? Al tochlu mimenu na, right? And then we cannot eat it, right? We have to see it whole. Have to be burned, any leftovers, right? And Pasuk in Aleph, v'kacha tochlu oto, matnechem chagurim na'alechem beraglachem, makechem b'yadchem. Right? What do all those things mean? I believe. All of those things are saying, I believe God is going to knock on my door any minute. So I got to be ready, right? At least for myself, I can definitely acknowledge I'm proud of my cheesiness, right? At least for me, the year of COVID, I believed Mashiach was coming. When Bibi Netanyahu announced here that they were closing Ben Gurion and no one would be allowed to enter this country, I was 100% convinced that Mashiach was coming that night, to the extent, and I wasn't even thinking of this pasuk, as Tanakh crazy as I am, I dafka wore a beautiful dress, put on makeup, wore my sheitel, and then put on socks and sneakers because I live in Efrat, and I said, it's 12K, it's 12 kilometers. I'm gonna have to walk, right? We're not far enough to get, VIP. So I'm gonna have to walk. It's gonna be rough. So I'll just wear socks and sneakers because it'll be a long walk. Right? That's how convinced I was, because that's what this pasuk is describing. Emunah, right? Real faith that it is going to happen any second, right? And that's what Hashem is saying. I want you there. I want you in a place that your shoes are on, ready to go, right? B'chipazon, right? There should be angst. Ki Pesachul Hashem. This is Pesach. And then Hashem says, right, that he's going to come through, kill out all the Bechurim, right? But Pasuk Yud Gimel, that next question, V'haya hadam lachem laot al habatim, but ra'iti et hadam ufasachti aleichem, right? Make the dam a sign for you, and then when I see that, I'll pass over, right? So who is the sign for? And it really is both. Meaning, if you put the sign on the door, that means you are saying, Ani ma'amin, right? I believe. I believe Hashem is passing through tonight, right? But Hashem says, I need that action. It can't just be like, oh yeah, no, in the privacy of my own home, I believe. No, right? The whole night is about showing the world, I believe, right? Putting my emunah and wearing it on my sleeve and saying, that's the intensity of my faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I want the world to know. And Hashem says, when I see that level of emunah, ufasachti, right, then I will pass over your house. And that's what will make this an eternal chag, right? And then we get to the actual night, right? And seemingly they held their ends of bargain, right? They did keep Karban Pesach, and they did make Pesach Mitzrayim, and they had their Seder, etc., etc. But then, in those last moments, what happens? Paro tells them they can go, and nothing. Vatachazak Mitzrayim al ha'am lemaher lishalchem. They need the Mitzrayim to push them and pick up their pace. And then, right, it's just a crazy moment because you're like, what? They opened up and unlocked the gates of hell. And you didn't run? You weren't racing to be the first one out of Mitzrayim? First, they have to push you out, and then you have to say, oh, sorry, I just want to get my dough. I know I didn't have time to rest, but that's fine. I'll just take it as dough. What? What's going on? And why is this chametz such a huge element of our chag? If it's just this weird PS at the end, and you go back to these moments, and you have to take a minute to understand these people and realize that we are so much the same. Right? What happened? Why did they clearly put up dough? There was that little piece of them that just wasn't sure how it was all going to work out. Yeah, I've seen the other 9 makot, and they were awesome, right? And yeah, Hashem told me that there will be Makkah b'chol road, and then we're going to leave. True, but what if we don't? And what if I need food tomorrow, and you told me to get rid of everything and burn it? You made me burn my leftovers, right? And I don't know, what if tomorrow we're still here? Why should I believe? Right? And not even of being shtuchi, to God. But really, that question of, I don't know, that little, even if it's just 2%, that 2% of me is just going to say, you know what, I'm going to just put up some dough in case I need arughat eser tomorrow morning, right? In case I need to make lunch for my kids tomorrow. I don't want to hear them complain, right? So let me just put up the dough. And the question I really ask myself when reading these psukim is, are we really so different? Would we be any different in that moment and in our own moments? Right? I think all the time about why chametz is such a big deal to us today, because I think this is the message. I think chametz is a huge part of our story, because chametz is really the concept of faith. Right? I've seen beautiful Hasidut explanations, right? If you look at the word matzah and you look at the word chametz, right? Same letters, the only difference is the hey and the chet, right? And obviously a different order, but the hey and the chet are the only two letters that are different, right? And the hey has that gap that the chet doesn't have, right? Which many divrei Hasidut, which I love, say, that's the ego, right? Matzah has no ego, it's deflated, it has the opening for the air to leave, and chametz is the tight ego. And I think if we look at these psukim, it really helps us understand and appreciate that even more, right? I think each one of us has dough in the kitchen, right, so to speak. We all have that thing that's holding us back from fully diving into our faith and fully committing into where that faith could take us, because the dough is comfortable. The dough is a really good backup and safe space for us to know that we have control, right? To let go and to let God is exceptionally challenging, right? And I think chametz is that reminder to us to really self-reflect as we're searching for that chametz and ask ourselves truly, what is my chametz, right? What is my dough that I'm not willing to give up, and it's holding me back from that extra commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But I think that whole story of Perek Yud Bet, from beginning to end, is to remind us what this night is truly meant to be about, right? This night is meant to be, first and foremost, about abandoning all idolatry, right? Whatever our idolatry is, whatever other things, right, jade us and confuse us from our commitment to God, we need to abandon that. Once we abandon that, then I can start committing to God and I can start doing for Him. And then number 3, it's about a national identity, wherever we are in our nation, to commit to understanding and connecting to the nation as a whole, not just my type and not just my Daled Amod of it, but the nation as a whole. And then finally, the chametz, right? What is my dough? What is sitting in the kitchen that I just don't want to leave behind, right? What is anchoring me to not be fully in all elements of this religion? And I think if we truly tap into that, and over the next 2 weeks, instead of just looking for the Cheerios, right, really look inside and say, I want to be fully committed. I want to be just matzah and know that I am fully there. Then Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope we can all wear sneakers to our Seder and all be walking together and meet in person with the Geula Shlema and with the Beit HaMikdash. So wishing you a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, a beautiful Chag, but a beautiful Chag that we get to celebrate together here at the Beit HaMikdash.
Amen. Thank you so much. There was